Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Nabintu Nciko, a third-year law student at Kabarak Law School and the coordinator of Faith and Environment at Kabarak University Press. I'm delighted to be your moderator for this panel session. Allow me to briefly introduce the Faith and Environment at Kabarak University Press. Faith and Environment at Kabarak University Press is a research and advocacy initiative that promotes the integration of faith values and environmental stewardship. Since its launch in 2022, we have hosted over 10 webinars and featuring more than 30 panelists across 3 continents. We also run a blog with 11 published articles and more forthcoming, expanding the conversation on how faith inform practical response to the triple planetary crisis. In continuing this mission, we are honored to host this inaugural conference under the theme Climate Reparation, Enhancing Indigenous Knowledges, Beliefs and Philosophies for Climate Justice. The conference began earlier today at 9 a.m. Kenyan time and featured 4 insightful panels, and this is panel 4. Panel 4 titled Challenging Power Through Climate Reparation. The aim of this session is mainly to hold a roundtable discussion on who holds power and who does not in climate reparation, and share strategies for challenging existing power structures and amplifying indigenous agency in shaping climate reparation. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panelists. Our first panelist is Melissa Kathleen Wanjiru Mungai, Editorial Fellow and Research Coordinator at Kabarak Law School, and editor of Harvesting Equality, Gender, Governance, Stewardship and the Colonial Future in Kenya Agriculture, published by Kabarak University Press, where she contributed the chapter called An Epistemic Imposition of the Colonial Ecofeminisms on Women and Agriculture in Kenya. Our second panelist is Laureen Mukami Nyamu, editorial assistant at Kabarak University Press and former editor-in-chief of the Kabarak Law Review. She is the author of a forthcoming paper titled Corporate Personhood and Environmental Justice, Promoting Corporate Accountability Through Personhood in African Philosophy. Our third panel is Nciko Arnold, Climate Change Advisor at Amnesty International Eastern and Western Regional Office and research lead and author of Madagascar, That Suffering Haunts Me Even Here, The Struggle for Human Rights of the Antandoi People in Southern Madagascar. We do have our fourth panelist. I'm sure he'll be joining us later. Professor Chid Odinkalu, Nigerian lawyer and professor in practice of international humanitarian law at Fletch School of Law, and author of Poor Justice or Justice of the Poor, a policy framework for reform of customary and informal justice in Africa, published in volume 2 of the World Bank Legal Review, Law, Equity and Development. Welcome, dear panelists. Thank you, esteemed panelists, for honoring our invitations and joining us today. This will be a moderated conversation lasting for about 45 minutes in total, during which the panelists will respond to a series of guiding questions based on their research and experience. Afterward, we will open the floor to the Q&A, which will last for about 15 minutes. To our audience, Please share your question in the Q&A box. I will read them when the time comes. So, yeah, let's begin. Then let's start by Miss Melissa. What lies at the bedrock of the power imbalance in climate reparation? Let's start with that question. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Nabintu, and greetings to all who are joining us. First, let me say I'm so proud of you for convening this very, very important conversation. I've been cheering you on since the morning. And yeah, it's been an honor so far also to just listen to the conversation so far and to learn as well. And I think they did most of the foundational work on perhaps the question you've asked me. But since you mentioned my scholarly contribution, my recent one on harvest inequality, where I perhaps set out the framework for that text, which was looking at the challenges in the agricultural sector in Kenya, in particular counties. And we had to look at things like governance and a buzzword I've had in this conversation a lot, stewardship as opposed to ownership. We looked at gender, and there we have a beautiful theory called ecofeminism, which if I have time to speak about at length, I will really divulge into that a lot. And also just looking about the future, decolonial futures. So I think I'll start my contribution there. I think the bedrock of this conundrum we have in trying to understand faith, environment, and how we fit into that conversation is that it's a clash of disciplines. It's a clash of also I guess how we also understand many things in the world. It's epistemic as well, you know. It's also a clash of our civilizations as Africans. And here I can think of so many African frameworks, African theories that guide us, starting with Professor Ali Mazrui, who helped us understand ourselves as Africans. Why are we so torn when it comes to a simple fact like conserving the environment, caring for nature, you know? And he says it's because our Africanness is comprised of indigenous African traditions, then our Western traditions, and here I've heard a lot about the Euro-Christian traditions in the morning, and then, of course, the Islamic traditions that we have. And there's nothing wrong with this clash of civilizations. I think it also makes us very unique as Africans. The issue comes in which one we give priority to. And so far, I have heard and learned that we give too much priority to our Western traditions owing to our colonial histories and the way our legal tradition continues to prefer that method of environmental protection. When it comes to religion, we have Professor John Beatty, who says religion is a companion, a constant companion of the African. You cannot sever his religion or her religion from who he or she is. Yeah. So while we have our established traditions, and I'm happy we've heard a lot about this in the morning, it tends to be severed from our day-to-day. We want that religion in our morning when we wake up, when we go to sleep, when we're in this conversation in an ivory tower conference. We want it in our secrecy, you know? And so sometimes it's not in touch. The religious questions are often not in touch with who we are on a day-to-day basis as Africans, yet it is at the very core of who we are. And lastly, on the gender question, which I've not heard about so far, I keep seeing it lost in the discussion, brought up or not, ecofeminism. And there was a speaker who said that their foundation's core mandate started from the nuclear warfare in Japan with that horrible massacre at Hiroshima. And that is exactly where ecofeminism was born as well. It saw the connection between ecology and the feminist question. at a time where everyone wanted to be masters of our nature as opposed to stewards of nature. And this had a direct effect on the woman question as well. Woman, who I keep repeating when I describe ecofeminism, woman is understood as the beginning of nature, the seed, the custodian, and so on and so forth. So I think these clashes of disciplines, these clashes of our civilizations and not understanding how we enter the conversation is perhaps, to me, the bedrock of the problem. And that would be my beginning remarks.
Wow, wonderful contribution, Melissa. Let's move to Laureen Mukami first. Secondly, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Nabintu, for the invitation and for convening this conference and also this panel. So for me, what will be the bedrock of this crisis? I'd categorize it into three factors. So there are a range of systemic factors such as especially the politics and the laws surrounding climate change, climate reparations, and the various actors with various powers in the whole climate system. And another bedrock of the climate crisis is the dominance of certain types of knowledge and certain types of epistemologies in the whole conversation on climate change and reparations. And the third factor for me would be capitalism and living in this system of extraction whereby most global South countries, especially African countries, are at the periphery of a very extractive system that for decades and maybe even centuries has been extracting and developing at the expense of these other countries. And now that there's the crisis of climate change, now the vulnerable populations in global South states and regions are the ones who are bearing the brunt. And again, this coupled with the dominant knowledge systems and the dominant epistemologies, which again influence the kinds of policies that are put in place to tackle climate change, again, like further exacerbate the situation. So I'd start with those three factors, and I'm going to discuss them and weave them more in as we go along with the discussion. And just as a point, I'm really going to focus on corporations and their role in the climate change crisis and their role in climate reparations and what they do or how they interact with the factors that form part of the bedrock of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukami. Wonderful, wonderful. Let's move to Nciko. Opening remarks on what lies at the bedrock of power imbalance in climate reparation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Nabintu. And I don't know like what I can add after Melissa has spoken. Yeah, for those who don't know, Melissa was my editor-in-chief in our Strathmore Law review at some point, and really learned a lot of my editing, like just unpacking, like complex issues from her. And I've really had like the pleasure to work with Laureen as well. To really answer this question, I think what lies at the bedrock of this power imbalance in climate change or climate change governance itself, I guess it's just climate change governance itself by its structure, what it came to do. Because to understand this, we may look at the law of transactions and the law of side effects. So on the one hand, we have transactions, and these are the transactions that are leading us to the climate crisis as we know it today. This includes, for example, trade, investment, intellectual property, all these transactions that are resulting into climate change as we know it today. And now the side effects now, that's where climate change governance comes in, not to deal with the root cause of the problems, but to deal actually with the symptoms of the problems, the side effects of the problems. And that's why you'll see that there's really a really clear delineation between the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC, all these frameworks that we have to deal with climate change. They don't touch on things like international trade, international investment, international like intellectual property laws and everything. So they're really like left on the side. And now when you look at that, who are the beneficiaries? So you'll see who are the beneficiaries of international trade, who are the beneficiaries of international investment, international property. So generally, you'll see that these things have been working for the global north, for Western countries, for industrialized countries, and who are now suffering from the side effects. Now we have indigenous people. Now we have people in the global south who are now on this other receiving end of the climate change crisis. But now the system itself, so no matter how much time we spend within the climate change governance like framework, so we'll see already that we don't have enough room to somehow rectify this power imbalance, because by structure itself, it just came to deal with the symptoms, the side effects, and not the actual problem, like the source of the problem, which is this trade, investment, intellectual property laws, as I was trying to explain. I think I can stop there, and perhaps I'll get an opportunity to unpack this more.
Well, wonderful conversation. From what I've get to from Melissa, she talks about the clash of civilization, and Mukami talks about more of domination of certain types of knowledges and cosmologies, such as capitalism. And Nciko came with the idea of climate governance, climate change by its structure itself, and what it comes to do, and the transaction and side effects, which do not deal with the root causes of the problem. From that understanding of the bedrock, how does now these imbalances, these imbalances that we have just noted affect the climate system as a whole now? If you can have also that conversation, and maybe how can we shift power now in climate reparations? Because from Melissa, we had a question of colonization. There is that idea of Western, the idea of industrialized nation, that Western colonizers, if I could say that. From Nciko, same idea, industrialized nation coming, and from Mukami now, the corporate power in it, which again, it's, for me, the continuity of colonization in this whole framework. Yes. Let's start with Melissa again.
Yeah, I like this question because it allows us to imagine for once and to think. And yeah, that's why part of the book that you cited, Harvesting Equality, one of the subtitles there was Decolonial Futures. We can sit on the past for so long and sit on the problem. And what is this root cause? And why am I an African with all these issues? And then you never think about what can I do moving forward. So there have been many contributions I've had so far that guide us in thinking about, where to go from here, from this past. And it's very interesting, especially for decolonial scholars. Those are people who want to attack this power and confront this power. In fact, the first thing they do is to understand how these Western traditions or this Western colonization or this brutal force or brutalism, how it encountered our African selves, if I can put it that way, our ecosystems, our ecology, and the things that are dear to us as a people. And I'm always encouraged by the fact that most of these scholars say that there is no civilization, no dominating civilization that found a people who are empty. They always found a people who are full of something, full of life, full of stories and histories, full of cultures and languages that bond them with their very ecosystem that they hold dear to them. So it's always a return to that. Who are these people that they found? And can we reclaim them as they speak, as they say, reclamation? Let's bring it back to the fore. But also for those of us who are in this work of reclaiming, we must also build coalitions. That's something else that has been very, it stands out. You cannot do it alone. And a number of them stop there. Here I'm talking about our forefathers in these radical struggles like Frantz Fanon. They kind of left us with redistribution of wealth sort of conversations. I think Mukami is the expert in that since she's talking about corporations and the work, of course, our ambassador Nciko does. Arnold Nciko, now that you're there, two of you, at Amnesty, but redistribution, who has been left out of this narration? Who can we bring together? And are we thinking about the same thing, or we have distorted messaging? So definitely when it comes to climate change, if I just take the example of the panelists, the work that Nciko is doing, for example, his recent report on Madagascar, can we discuss it, for example, in some of the decolonial conversations we have on Saturdays? It's called The Hat. Can we discuss that and see how it affects our legal careers, our student careers, and so on and so forth? If Nyamu, Miss Nyamu here has her paper out very soon, she even presented it in some nice countries out there in front of these very people we are fighting, Can we again read it and make it in, put it in our course outlines as teachers? And circulate that kind of knowledge. So I think coalition building in a narrative that is common and sensible really works in this kind of pushback as well. And the key word I've been using all through is doers, is doing. You have to be active, you have to be moving, and you have to keep oscillating between these two spaces of we are an oppressed people, yes, but we are also a people who are resilient and can liberate ourselves. So I think I'll put those two. It is definitely going back to the past and seeing what enriched us and reclaiming it. And if, of course, if you are duty bound to reclaim, then do it well and don't do it alone. So those particular things. And within that, let me just say very briefly, within this reclamation endeavor and this doing and this sharing of knowledge and so on and so forth, one thing that will be yielded is consciousness. I love that word as well. There'll be a consciousness. You don't have to be forced into explaining or living a life that is connected with who you are, both environmentally and also as a person. You don't have to struggle because it's within you. So that conscious building, that consciousness that will be reaped out of this process is very important, I think, in coalition building. It's also a space of honesty. You come to terms with who you are and what kind of mistakes you have been doing. I loved how Sister Dr. Mudhoni talked about that earlier in the morning, wastage, how you waste food, you waste water, you are greedy. These are the things capitalism left with us, and industrialization continues to live with us. Greed, accumulation. Yet Africans are people of abundance. They love to see life in its fruition, in its fullest fruition. So that conscious building, I think, is one thing that is heartening, that will emanate from those efforts of reclamation and coalition building.
Yes, thank you, Miss Melissa. Arnold, can you hear from me?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, and really, like with no offense, I don't know how we can fix this power imbalance. I know in Kabarak we learn from a biblical perspective, and maybe Jesus is the one to just come and fix this power imbalance. And I'm not just saying this, like to just entertain the audience, because as we all know, the impacts of climate change are disproportionately felt. So we're having them, like in African countries, in the global south, generally, indigenous people being affected like the most. Women are being affected the most. And so far, those who are benefiting from the transactions that have led us to climate change are not really like feeling it as much. And until they start feeling it, I'm not sure that they'll be ready to surrender the comfort, the privileges that they are enjoying from not acting, on resolving the climate crisis. So there is that element there. But now, how do we move from here? Like, I usually love this idea of Professor Samir Amin speaking of the global citizen. Yeah, because again, climate change is not that problem where we will just sit down as Africans and then we fix it by ourselves. So we're actually suffering the impact of from other people coming from outside of the continent and all that. So we need to form coalitions, as Melissa was speaking, but really even like transnational coalitions, where we are trying to see how can we tap into social movements in the global north and try to see how we can use the mechanisms that they have at a more domestic level, maybe, because the international system, the international architecture, the climate change governance regime really is set against us. But how can we come together, like in these coalitions, to try to get to some resolution, to try to imagine like a really way forward? Also noting that we don't have the advantage of time, because the global surface is warming. Climate change is really increasing, impacts are really increasing, and they're being felt disproportionately on us. But also one key thing, and I think this has been coming through the discussions that we've had so far, is to really just note that for every imperial project, there is an epistemic basis to sustain it. And therefore, epistemic justice, like education, is really key for us if we are to really come into this particular space. And with education, we can do like really, really like many stuff. So for example, China receives more climate change finance than Somalia. Just picture that. Again, it's because the mechanisms of accessing the funds that are available at the UN level, they're so complex. And the argument is usually that we don't have the capacity to navigate all that process to get to this money. So education is really, really key. Can we build that capacity if we are to play by the rules that are set against us? Is there a way for us to just really like up our skills? Other elements are to do with even data, for example. One of the main effects of the climate change crisis, and even of the solutions to the climate change crisis, so droughts are displacing people, floods are displacing people, and then solutions in the energy transition, such as carbon market, are displacing people. But many a times we don't have the data saying these are the people who have been evicted. These are the people who have been displaced by these climate change related harms. These are their needs. And then we try where possible to quantify and come up with an amount for things that can be, of course, like quantified, because when you lose your livelihood, there's a lot that you that goes into that. And really just engaging other institutions of global governance that seem to have left us out. So for example, the ICJ, like the advisory opinions that are coming from the International Court of Justice, what we are planning at the African Union, at the African Court on Human and People's Rights, to try to be like in these spaces, taking like really creative steps to try to undo this power imbalance. One example is, for example, the ICJ advisory opinion. If you really go out there, people are really clapping for it. It's the best, like so progressive. But when you look at it like really keenly, something that has been established, like in science approved by global north countries, is that colonialism is not only at the origin of the climate crisis, but also it is increasing the vulnerability of people to climate change. And this is something that we covered in the report that we released on how climate change is affecting the Antandroy people in Madagascar. But when you read the ICJ advisory opinion, it's about, I think, 141 like pages, if I'm not wrong. the word colonialism is not mentioned, like even once, with respect to climate change. And when you go to the separate opinions by the judges and the declarations that they made, again, the word colonialism with respect to climate change is not mentioned even once. And now you leave that the court just refused to answer the question, how far back can we go in claiming reparations for climate change? And climate change and colonialism are really two injustices that are causally interconnected. So it's very hard to speak of one without the other. But we already have, like a global court. Of course, science has said this, but we know everything is politics. So whatever the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they tell us about, the interconnectedness of climate change and colonialism, it still need political backing. And we know, I remember Melissa reviewing this fine book on Courts Do Politics. Yeah, so like the ICJ had an opportunity to give political backing to those scientific findings. And probably now, people like us in the NGO space, in academia, can now come and build upon that and proceed. So we really need to be deliberate on engaging like these spaces. I don't know whether it is the law clinic at Kabarak or the Kabarak University Press to try to engage the African court and really like pushing the court judges. How can we try to speak up where the ICJ was silent? And we have many resolutions at the level of the African Union. There's a resolution of 2022 really pushing African countries to ask for reparations. And we know really like, again, even when we look at the harms like committed during the colonial period, there is a disproportionate impact again on the indigenous people. So you're pushing like the court thinking, the court creativity to even like push African states to go and request for another advisory opinion at the ICJ now on colonial reparations, because the court refused deliberately to address that question. So there is some hope, because I know that there is a team planning on requesting the African court to speak on this very question of colonial reparations and give a position on that. Yeah, the hope can be the same way we saw with climate change, or we saw the ICLOS starting with an advisory opinion, then the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and then at some point, the ICJ just had to do that. So we may start, these conversations on the continent, this coalition building on the continent, and hopefully with our transnational coalition building, we can be able to inspire the people to do that. I think there's a lot we can learn, for example, from the Gen Z protests, the way they've been spreading like bushfires from Peru, Bangladesh, now Madagascar, Morocco. I hear now even in Tanzania, there's some indications of that. Yeah, I have a lot to share on this, but yeah, let me shut up for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nciko, for this wonderful insights. Wow. Let's just invite Laureen, Nyamu. Yes, take us. Yeah.
Thank you, Nabintu. So I really agree with what Nciko and Melissa have said on coalition building, as well as the concept of being global citizens, even as Africans. But first, I'm going to discuss on how the various factors lead to imbalance in the climate system, and also, so earlier I'd mentioned that there are systemic factors, and as well as dominant knowledge, and also the logic of extraction. So within these systemic factors, you look at how like international law is structured, you look at how international human rights law is structured also, and also how corporate law is structured. There are various systemic factors that are grounded in law that lead to this crisis. For example, when the way corporate law is structured, that such that corporate actors can accumulate a lot of power, can generate various profits, and also can even get away with not fulfilling their environmental rights obligations. See, these are factors that again further accelerate the climate change crisis, because remember that some of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases are fossil fuel companies. And you go to international human rights law, I don't really think there are binding human rights obligations for such companies, and also if there are still various loopholes that companies can use to even escape from fulfilling their responsibilities. Even looking at it from an international law perspective, some countries have veto power to even reject some climate change propositions. So see, that's like the first systemic factor that leads to that imbalance. Then now coming back to the dominant knowledge and dominant epistemologies, because we're so used to like one way of knowing, again, it becomes very difficult to challenge the status quo. So going back again to corporate law, where accustomed to this is how a corporation is supposed to be structured. These are the aims that a corporation is supposed to have, such as profit making, that we forget that there are other aims that this entity can have, even having responsibilities of being a moral agent. But because the dominant knowledge is that this is a profit making structure, it's a legalistic structure, we end up not challenging the status quo. Still on that dominant knowledge, even when we look at land reform and even land ownership, there's a very huge emphasis on land ownership and disregarding other forms of owning and using land, such as occupancy rights. So we end up emphasizing that there are certain classes of people that have to own land, and that is exclusionary to other people. And again, all this compound, and then you put the logic of extraction, where the system is structured that we're always taking from the environment, we're always digging into the earth, taking minerals, emitting greenhouse gases. That leads to the imbalance. Then I think a shift happens when we become, like openness to being. So for me, mostly the shift will be epistemic, and this again grounds or just marries with what Melissa and Nciko were discussing. So you see, openness to new forms of being, new forms of knowledge, that we can even sit down and reconceptualize how do we structure reparations. Should it only be monetary? Should it also be relationship building or repairing relationships? Should we rethink the various systems that we're using to clamor for climate justice? So within that openness of being, we can be as creative as possible to identify various ways in which we can call for reparations. So just in summary, the shift for me happens when we become open to new ways of being. And in being open to that, we're also considering indigenous knowledges. So just to like quote even the works of Professor Mbembe, like in his recent keynote speech, where he emphasized on looking to forgotten reservoirs of knowledge. And even Mudimbe does this when he emphasizes that it's important to look to the experience of rejected forms of wisdom. So still in the climate justice reform and in the call for climate justice reforms, let us not forget that indigenous knowledge systems have a lot to offer, not only how we think about the environment, how we think about concepts like personhood, how we think about land and our relationship to land. Yeah, so I'm going to stop there, Nabintu.
Thank you so much, Mukami. Such wonderful insights. Also, just coming back to come back to Melissa in your article, Epistemic Position of the Colonial Ecofeminism on Women and Agriculture in Kenya. You mentioned the idea of colonized woman in terms of colonialism, dual mandate of civilization and economic agenda. As an empty category, she's erased from memory, history, and even existence. Additionally, you mentioned how By instrumentalizing her nature, the colonized woman lost sense of herself, sense of relation to the spiritual world, land knowledge, like the land knowledge of planting, the ecological organization. So my question to you will be, in what ways climate reparation can open ways for the colonial turn when it comes to gender, and especially the colonial turn as you again quoted it in your paper, has the view that coloniality is the fundamental problem of our time, and the coloniality and the decolonialism are necessary tasks that remain unfinished. Yeah, I would love to hear your view on that. Your views on that.
Yeah, so that quote you've read is Maria Lugon, I want to say one of the pioneers on decolonial feminism in the 1980s, around there. And of course, there are many women professors and scholars who she borrows that thought from, and also many decolonial scholars who are fighting for liberation at that time, where she gets this idea that colonization for this woman colonial subject was harder and tougher on her because these Westerners were coming with this idea of man as supreme. And so by the time it got to the woman, she's a nobody because the colonized Black man is already a nobody. So what about the woman? So it's a very interesting label that she says the colonized woman is emptied completely. She's erased from everything. But at the same time, the quote continues to say that's where we need to begin our scholarship. We need to return to that, what she calls fractured locus, the starting point. And I think I was talking about it, that you are both, when you enter this discussion on climate reparations, based on the frameworks I've outlined, in the beginning of my speech or remarks, especially like ecofeminism, you have to start with, what was my oppression like, whether it's in the present terms or past terms. But I also have to recognize that I'm moving towards a liberated future if I want it. So at that fractured locus is where we always have to begin our scholarship. And as you've said, Faith and Environment also is an advocacy platform. So I think those two will be something that you must consider. When we went into the field to speak to real women, real women in Kenya, real women who are farming, to remove all these theorizations, and ask them about how they contribute to this ecological question. First of all, even asking was, a bit too much because you could just see it with your own eyes. These are women working in a flower plantation with, most disastrous conditions, no equipment, yet they're dealing with chemicals that are detrimental to their health. And they will tell you that they've suffered, yes, certain consequences, in the way they lead their lives, but yet they still have to work. You will see this same woman saying, at the same time, I'm a leader in my farming circle, that is a saving society. I'm the leader, I'm the one who's put these women together, and we're putting our coins together for the good of our family. This same woman is also being trained by these civil society organizations, being told about her rights, her labor rights, and where to buy the best produce or fertilizers or inputs, or whatever the case may be. She's also been told she's in the global space, so she needs to technology up. She needs to improve her technological savviness, So she's diverse. In a word, that's what I want to say. We met people, women who were living that ecofeminism principle of diversity. Stop cookie cutting this woman. Stop placing her into a particular boundary and saying, if she's a woman who is farming in this particular space, whether it's a corporate plantation, I use that word very deliberately, or whether she is doing her own homegrown farming for the family. Stop calling her rural woman farmer. And whenever you want to look for funds for her or to improve her project, in a nutshell, you keep essentializing, as Maria Lugon was castigating. You keep emptying her of who she can be and how she can continue connecting with this world. And so we can learn from this diversity principle that women have intuitively, biologically, and also I don't know whether it's spiritually, that we have been given that kind of capacity to be everywhere and somewhere at the same time. I heard Reverend Justus Mutuku, our acting provost at Kabarak University, speak about aesthetics, beauty. If you watch Professor Ali Mazrui's documentary, Triple Heritage, episode 1 on nature, one of the things he says, drew these colonizers to Africa. And here was specifically, I think the episode was shot somewhere in the highlands of Kenya. What we're calling the White Highlands, but our beautiful highlands, was the beauty, the climate, the tropics, as they say, the oceans, how they were flowing. It was beautiful. And woman has this capacity to improve that beauty naturally and almost immediately, and improve and keep fighting. And this is what encouraged me when I met the women who formed the basis of the book, and also, of course, were not only study subjects, but were the main sources of that text. We're able to connect it, have a praxis between what they're told they should be and what they actually do. And the fact that they are not afraid to say that they fail whenever they try and confront power. This is something that I wanted to add to the discussion on, where are we going? There comes that time, and that's why I was saying, I made the assumption in this conversation that all of us here want to be in the mission of reclaiming on this question for climate reparations. We want to be the doers, we want to be at the forefront. So perhaps I'm making the assumption I'm speaking to the converted. One of the things that pains me sometimes when I'm in this struggle is how easily people give up and how easily people forget. And we have been shamed in written work. Nciko, Arnold, and Laureen have talked about that epistemic, that every oppression comes from some ideology somewhere. So, we've been described, Africans, as lazy, barbaric, backward, and all those funny words they use. And sometimes we show those kind of tendencies. Sometimes. Are we honest with ourselves when we're in this reclamation space? So Arnold Nciko is saying, let us go to these particular sites of reclamation, like the African court. Let us come to a conference like this held on a weekday and discuss climate reparation. How consistent are we going to be with these efforts? Or is it a one-off thing, And that usually pains me, the lack of consistency, the easiness of giving up, the fact that you want somebody else to do it, somebody else to be brilliant, not you as this empowered African who is leading climate reparations. And that's why I'm very proud when I sit in these panels with people like you who have done great work at, Faith and Environment with all those blogs, and this conference week. I'm always happy with people like Arnold Nciko, because you won't just see him talking, what do they say, speaking truth to power in those COP20 somethings, but you'll also see him sparing time to mentor the next person in his ideas of what he thinks it should be. And those are sort of kind of the things I see what the women we worked with have done. They come up with this critical mass of women who don't want that generation of knowledges that they've sort of reclaimed, the fact that they know who they are, that they are in different spaces at different times. When I say spaces, I mean whether it's geopolitically, whether it's local, global, whether it's political or homebound. whether it's private, public, they've, dismantled all those spaces. They want to keep culturing that. And that was something that I think should be improved moving forward. In fact, with the many traditions we've had of conserving the environment in our many communities and our diverse communities since morning, I would say just let them be. Leave them alone. Let them be, let them progress. Let's stop homogenizing. Let's stop saying this is the standard. Let us come up with a standard operating procedure for how the Oromo people, just let it flourish. Let it be discursive, as they say, fluid within time and space. Just leave them alone. If that's like a parting shot, as opposed to studying it and subjecting it to too many scientific models of research and so on and so forth. So in that kind of research framework, that's what I saw, that it starts from that theory of emptied category, but it's slowly been, dissipated and dismantled, because this same woman who was an empty category is still receiving these many knowledges on reparations and liberation, as the case may be. I hope that sort of answers rather than confuses. But of course, part of the solution is also to know that you will forever be confused in this liberation struggle. You can never be sure. It's never linear. It's never today victory and it keeps going. There'll always be kind of those cycles. So let's keep encouraging each other, I think, and seeing how when there's a victory in one space, we celebrate that. And then when our brethren are going through a struggle, a hard time, we sort of retreat and talk about it. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much, Melissa. I'm informed Prof. Chidi is in. Prof. Chidi Odinkalu. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Prof. Chidi. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. We've started our conversation first with understanding the imbalance in climate reparation and mainly where the imbalance comes from. And then later and from the panelists, we've learned that the imbalance, according to Melissa, comes from the clash of civilization. According to Arnold, comes from the climate change by its structure and what climate change by its structure itself, and how, when it comes to transaction and side effects, interact in a sense where when you have climate change, it's mainly caused by investment, treaties, investment law, and when it comes to the effect of climate reparation, when it comes to how to solve the effect of climate change, we forget to go to the root cause of the problem and just start from there. And according to Laureen Mukami, she more talks about capitalism and domination of certain epistemologies against the others. And after that, we moved in. Now I was just looking at like I was more looking at Melissa Mungai article on. She has published a wonderful article in the Kabarak University Press on ecofeminism, which I found really very, very interesting, on how the double standard of the double heritage of colonialism, civilization, and its economic agenda. Just a minute. Okay, civilization and its economic agenda consider a woman as an empty category and erase her from memory. And we are just understanding how climate reparation comes in as a decolonial term. Maybe if we could have just your view on that, then we can move on maybe especially the shift of power in climate reparation.
No, thank you very much, Letitia. And can I please apologize? I'm joining late, and but there are time zone issues. So it's relatively early morning here, so and I'm not usually awake in the mornings, so please forgive me if I don't sound articulate at all. I want to begin therefore with an allocatus in effect. So if you're going to convict me for being fairly useless in what I'm about to say, please feel free to do so, but pass a light sentence. That's the only thing I ask for. I joined, and also thank you for allowing me, nevertheless, to join in my rather inarticulate and inadequate form. I joined when I think I listened to Arnold and I listened to Melissa. It's good to see you, Melissa, by the way. Ever the African princess and queen, as a matter of fact. Now, and I thought Melissa actually spoke to me in many ways. I find the externalities, the epistemic externalities involved in the climate change conversation rather chastening and troubling at the same time. The idea of climate reparations, I understand only in the context of the points that Melissa's made. But first of all, is the dependency inherent in the way we discuss climate. It's an idea that's been imported from the West to us, and we kind of think we are playing catch up, when in fact, the West stole the idea from us, destroyed our relationship with faith and climate, and rendered our entire existence rather challenging and fragile. And so it seems to me, and in this conversation, and it's interesting, this meeting is themed around faith and climate reparations. Now, most peasant societies, most African societies, to begin with, were theocracies. They were theocracies because traditional African societies were mostly theocracies. Why were they theocracies? Because most things were explained or organized around notions of God. All right? And so we are very worshipful people in what we do traditionally. And these notions of God were built around nature. Water bodies were groves of faith. Forests were groves of faith. Animals were godified or deified, depending on how you want to frame that. And all of these things were done for a reason. Conservation, preservation of nature, and preservation of our relationship with nature. So when we deified water bodies, it was so that we will preserve their purity and their availability for consumption by human beings. Okay? We deified animals so that we would not hunt them into extinction. We deified forests so that nature will be available there to serve as the lungs of our society and the lungs of our community. We deified hills and mountains. We deified rocks. All of those served a purpose. On the one hand, it showed a spiritual dimension. On the other hand, it preserved nature. It therefore meant that although we did not have hospitals, we lived balanced lives. People went to work, they exercised properly, they ate organic food, and you could see old people in our communities well into their 90s and 100s routinely. So the West came in, colonialism came in, the Brits visited and the French visited, and then they refused to go because if we were so uncivilized, why did they refuse to go? They refused to go because with our notions of faith, we had preserved nature, and they found that fascinating. And in order to achieve a takeover of that, they told us that everything we believed in did not matter. They did that as a matter of law. They did that as a matter of religion. They did that as a matter of politics and economics and political economy. And so, therefore, the entire knowledge basis and faith basis of our society was destroyed, and so was nature, because they broke the back of what it took to preserve nature and climate, which was our faith systems and the coherence of our faith systems to our climate systems and our very existence. So they replaced it with a new legal system or legal order. And they told you that your legal order was received. Your knowledge order was received. Your faith order was received. Within that framework, your climate change knowledge is received. So it seems to me that in a meeting like this, in a conference like this, we've got to begin by reconstituting that entire body of knowledge. And when people talk about, going to discarded knowledge mechanisms, no, those are actually the original knowledge mechanisms. African knowledge mechanisms on climate are the foundation. And this idea of going to France to begin to, if you don't have the Paris Accords or another one in Kyoto in Japan, you cannot think climate. We have got to rebel against it. And it's, as I say, it's very interesting. It's entirely accidental that this is framed around faith and climate, but there is such foundational significance to that framing. I hope you capture it in what you report on this conference, because as I said, the origin of Africa's relationship with climate was actually faith. The faith of our forefathers and foremothers and foreancestors who believed that God and the deity explained our entire relationship with everything. How the West broke the back of that is how we got to this climate crisis. They destroyed our beliefs in the forests. And what happened? They started logging. We no longer have forests. They destroyed our relationship with the animals. We are now doing what? We are trying to save the animals. Endangered species. And we have conventions to do that. Correct? Our water bodies are dead. If you want to look at, there's a very fantastic case from Zambia, Vedanta and Lungowe, the community whose water assets were polluted by Vedanta in Zambia, and who could not find remedies in Zambia. They had to go to court in the United Kingdom to get a judgment in 2019 to enable them protect their water assets and water resources. I don't want to take too much time. I hope at least I've tried to summarize with the inadequacy of a latecomer my point, which is really we've got to return the climate conversation to where it belongs, to Africa, and not continue to depend on the West for conceptualizations of climate and our relationship with nature. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Prof. Chidi, returning the climate conversation from where it belongs to Africa. Actually, this is a good way to invite again Nciko, who has published a report, Madagascar, that suffering out me even here, the struggle for human rights of the Antandroy people in southern Madagascar, where he examined the fleet of IDPs among the Antandroy people who are forced to flee their home due to drought and stricken Andoi region of Madagascar in pursuit of survival. And one of his key recommendations is the Kampala Convention on the IDPs. So he's pushing for ratification for that convention. And mainly I know this comes from his upcoming article on racist discourses beyond the 1998 UN Guiding Principles on the IDPs, normalizing third world IDPs as disposable people, where you expose the racial architecture of the UN Guiding Principle on IDPs to prevent climate IDPs from receiving reparation from the third world states. So my question to you will be, but also to Prof. Chidi, because I know he has worked on a lot in the human rights system. In what ways the Kampala Convention represents that decolonial turn we see like in Melissa's paper in addressing climate-induced IDPs, but also indigenous forced evictions that we see everywhere today. But also we can also just consider that question as in what ways human rights mechanisms, especially African human rights mechanisms, can can represent that decolonial return. Yes, yes. Also, Mukami, feel free to answer also to that question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the question. I would say one of the motivation behind looking at the Kampala Convention and for the interests of everyone, this is the African Union Convention on the Protection and the Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, which was adopted in 2009. But really, one of the key motivations for that is the fact that one of the greatest impacts of the climate change crisis, of global warming as we know it today, has been the movement of people. 100,000 millions of people are being forced to abandon their homes, their ancestral lands, their countries because of the impact of climate change. Yeah, but then again, as Melissa said, like confusion is part of of the work that we are doing, because you are seeing us, operating in the same systems that we seem to be rejecting. That these particular frameworks are not working for us. These particular frameworks have been imposed to us. We know we need to return to the real framework, to the proper frameworks. But I was really examining the way the United Nations guiding principles on internal displacement have been somewhat silent to the plight of people who have been internally displaced within their borders because of climate change. And what I found was that when you really look at the history, like the processes that led to the development and the codification of the UN guiding principles on how we can find a solution to the plight of people who are internally displaced within their borders. So you see the focus is more on humanitarian aid. It is more on charity. And when we look at climate justice, it's really a justice question. An injustice has been imposed upon us, and we need to come up to a resolution. We need to come up to reparations. So we don't find ways of claiming reparations within the guiding principles, the UN guiding principles. And it is from there that the Kampala Convention, the African Union Convention on Internally Displaced Persons, become relevant. And this is not Nciko speaking. It's just that African states themselves realized that there was no accountability mechanism under the United Nations guiding principles, and that's how they came up with a convention that now speak to these issues, which, when you think about it, is really a progressive move because we are moving from guiding principles to a binding convention. And by far, the Kampala Convention is the only binding convention in the world on internally displaced persons. And this includes people who have been internally displaced within their countries because of climate change, which is something that the United Nations guiding principles failed to do. But now it does not stop there. Remember, the core aim of the Kampala Convention, part of the core aims was to speak to this question of accountability, this question of reparations. So the convention provides what I believe to be a very robust monitoring and compliance mechanism, a mechanism through which we can claim reparations. It's just that we don't take very seriously our institutions. For example, the Kampala Convention says that every 2 years, as part of your reporting mechanisms, and I think Article 62 of the African Charter, every African state has to be reporting to the African Communion the progress that it has made to when it comes to implementing the Kampala Convention. So essentially, you have to say we have this problem of internal displacement caused by a number of factors, probably including climate change. And this is how we've been trying to address it. And where the challenges are, so that you can even use that avenue as an avenue from which to seek assistance from fellow African countries, from CSOs on the continent. So that's one mechanism. But since 2009, we're in 2025, only 3 countries have made that submission, have submitted their reports. Okay, the other mechanism that we have, the Kampala Convention, says that the African Union or any African country experiencing issues of internal displacement, which, as I said, may come also, and they're coming from climate change events such as droughts, floods, cyclones, sea level rise. So the African Union or any African country can say, okay, let's meet as Africa, as countries that have ratified this convention. It's like 33 of them. And let's brainstorm, let's come up, with solutions, strategies of how we can address these issues, of how we can claim reparations. And really, when you think about that, it's not really like a basic, suggestion, because the possibilities can be really multiple once we meet in that conference of the parties, in that forum, that platform that the Kampala Convention provides. But then again, since 2009, that our platform has only met twice. The first time it was in Harare, Zimbabwe in 2017. And that was just, vibes, an introductory meeting. So we didn't touch on thorny issues of how to claim reparations, for example. The second meeting was held last year in Nairobi in secrecy. So even the African Commission's special rapporteur on internally displaced persons was not invited. Yeah, so that's what I can say on the convention. We have these mechanisms on the continent, but we are not trying them, while avenues of trying them are actually there. That's why I was really I'm really happy that we are insisting on this epistemic question. And how are we trying to actualize that? How are we acting, on the real knowledges, if we can put it that way, on knowledges that are fit for our context. I am sorry, I have a really funny brain. I don't know if I answered all your questions or there was another angle to this.
No, you've answered it. Before inviting Mukami, let me invite first Prof. Chidi, because I know he has worked a lot in the African human rights system. I also know Melissa has worked to the African court. So you can also just chip in, Melissa. Feel free. Let's start with Professor Chidi first.
No, thank you very much for that. And I don't really have a lot more to add. The challenge is really how not to make IDPs from internally displaced to internally disposable. All right. And you see, again, we return to colony. Colony made Africans internally disposable people. And there were so many ways in which we could be disposed of. We could be disposed of physically. And so, liquidation was a central method of the colonial process, just massacres. And, displacement was a classic method. Lands were taken and not restored, and people were taken away from their lands and never returned, or they were relocated to lands that were from arable lands to non-arable lands, say in Zimbabwe or parts of Kenya, as a matter of fact. And these were historical injustices of displacement that were never redressed. And then we created post-colonial ghettos and post-colonial shanties, and they have become part of our lives. And so, first of all, there were those historical displacements. Those historical displacements have now become part of our political architecture. And every year we deal with those, when you have inundations of water bodies, fresh water bodies on land, you go back to those issues. When you had the PEV in Kenya, for instance, in 2008, most people will not remember that part of the reason why the PEV was as virulent as it was actually dates back to colonial displacements and resettlements from the period in the interwar years, particularly between the end of the First World War and the end of the Second World War, and the movement of populations from the highlands to the rift valleys and their forced resettlement as a result of that. And some of the virulence of that violence came from that displacement. Now, the only thing that the Kampala Convention adds here is a framework for recognizing climate as a cause of displacement. Quite obviously, there are other things, politics being one of them, history being another. the Kampala Convention defines internal displacement to include those caused by natural or human-made disasters. And obviously, the climate situation is a human-made disaster. Sometimes we attribute it to nature, but a lot of that from history as well. So in the past, of course, it used to be that because people were of this black pigment or poor or both in particular, or they were black, poor, and female, they never really got attended to. Now we're all supposed to be citizens of our respective African countries. And the only people whom our respective African governments appear to see are the powerful people, the sons and daughters of politicians, their wives, boyfriends, and mistresses, or their business partners. And the question is, how do we create a continent in which everybody matters, in which every citizen is going to get a fairer deal? And this is taking place in Kenya today, next door to Tanzania, where we can't even communicate with Tanzanians because Samia Suluhu Hassan must be returned to power by any means necessary. And as we speak, we are talking about internal displacement. Many Tanzanians have been abducted, internally displaced, and people are being abducted across borders in East Africa, and nobody is unable to talk about that. All of that is displacement within the East African community. And as we speak, if you have any contacts with Tanzania, it's coming out that people have been killed in the past 24 hours in these protests that have been taking place. It is internal disposability of humans for the purpose of subserving the influence of power. So I know that I've politicized the question a little because it's not just displacement. When we talk of displacement, we don't have human agency behind it. And when you add the human agency and the power behind it, it becomes a political question. And so I like for us to introduce the political question and then the dialectic of history into that conversation. And when we do, you ramify the issues beyond just the anodyne of people, being washed away by water. It is actually quite politically explosive. And that's why I introduced the notion of avoiding internal disposability of people, because when you speak of it in terms of disposability, it means there are no consequences for the interaction of power and what happens to people. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Prof. Chidi. Thank you so much. Melissa, something to add? Oh,
No, let's go on. I need to sit on that disposability new introduction. I am dumbfounded. But at least I could just add a quip here. That is the same sentiment I had, though I didn't know how to frame it. This is why it's good to speak to professors or listen to them when they speak. Thank you, Professor Chidi, for naming this conundrum. Our president, Ruto, yesterday was announcing in Nakuru County, where Kabarak University is located, that he has opened some road where IDPs from the post-election violence have been housed. 900 families, I think I saw the bulletin read, will now be moved to those alleged homesteads and farms that they have in the outskirts or wherever. And I was trying to understand, and then he said that he would compensate them 20,000 shillings each, Kenyan shillings, 20,000 per family. So those 900. And I was just thinking, wait, this post-election violence that happened in 2007, 2008, which you have rightly explained, has deeper histories and causations than just that moment, or so many ruptures. And that's the word. I just thought, a family, 20,000 Kenya shillings for all these years of being treated as really a disposable item. So it's food for thought even in the present. It's just, I saw it and I said, thank you, Professor, for naming it. That's the issue. We are being treated as essential items to just, put in and put out and, kind of dancing chairs. And my issue with Kampala conventions and all these human rights instruments and legal instruments we have in our systems, our international system, with my small knowledge interacting with these institutions, is in a nutshell, it's never a complete picture. They always have to rely on more realities. So they have to just kind of, those who are drafting and those who are working in that space have to be aware of their infallibility, their limitations, that this is not it. We need to do a bit more. So yeah, thank you, Professor Chidi, for naming that demon.
Wow, thank you so much. Let's move to Nyamu. I know she's writing a paper on personhood in Africa, in African philosophy. But my question is more on, from Judge Yusuf, separate opinion on ICG advisory opinion on climate change. We learned that green gas emissions remain in the atmosphere for centuries, causing multi-dimensional harm. This means that the solution we have to take today have to solve a century of violations. So in what way promoting corporate accountability, which is, I think, in your paper, corporate accountability to personhood in Africa, in African philosophy solve this century of violation? Yes, yes, thank you. And then also before Mukami start answering that question, just a reminder to our audience to please share their question in the Q&A, because I think after Mukami, we'll take some few comments from panelists, then we'll move to the Q&A question. Thank you.
Thank you, Nabintu, for the question. So yes, I was writing about personhood in African philosophy, and just to give a brief background, so trying to use the notion of personhood to expand the notion of corporate personhood as it is, so that you have a wider understanding of corporate duties, and try to create these corporate governance frameworks where corporations view themselves as part of their persons in the society and are having duties towards other persons in the society. So,
Sorry, Mukami.
now coming back to your question, to really contribute to the for centuries. So in that regard will be to really corporations to use clean energy.
Sorry,
You
we
hear me
did not.
now?
Yes, but could you please repeat? We didn't get the first part of your question.
Okay, so I was sorry.
We did not get the first part of your answer. If you could just repeat, yes.
Okay, so I was talking about personhood and its emphasis on corporate duties towards other persons in the community, because remember, a corporation or a company is considered to be a person. So I was talking about how one of the ways we can promote corporate accountability is to emphasize and even put in place policies by which companies can try and use clean energy sources. So I'm going to give an example. There's this company, British Petroleum, which in 2019 was conducted this whole advertising blitz where it was saying that it's moving towards clean energy fuels, but that turned out to be an instance of greenwashing. But one of the recent trends that a lot of companies are doing is to really try and emphasize on using clean energy, and in some instances, even trying to shift towards some other clean energy sources through the energy transition, although that still has some other issues of its own. But just thinking in that framework of trying to look for alternative and sustainable clean energy sources will be one of the ways in which we can move towards corporate accountability and reducing climate greenhouse gas emissions. But then this will require a more nuanced approach, because still transitioning towards a just transition or towards sustainable energy sources has some issues of its own, including getting free prior informed consent from some of the communities, or even extracting some of the minerals required for that transition. And also, there's a need to even look at the internal corporate structures that can be used. So I'm really emphasizing that the management of a company drives the company towards the best energy sources, or towards the outcome that will lead to the best outcome for climate change. So this will require that the directors or even the leaders of various types of companies make decisions based on that. And now going back to the knowledge or the epistemological part, when I was talking about being open to new forms of being, again, being open to new forms of how we can view the whole corporate structure as not just a legalistic being, but also as a person in a community with various duties, and also incorporating some African frameworks and even some African knowledge systems. So I'm going to give just 3 examples as I conclude, whereby we can get some examples from African epistemologies. For example, the concept of relationality, whereby every person is connected. This can serve as a framework for creating good corporate governance policies, whereby the well-being of this person is connected to the well-being of the other person. And another important aspect will be now on being the metaphysics of what a company is, and also its ontology. So there's this concept in African metaphysics whereby being or reality is composed of singular realities, very simple realities that come together to form this complex reality. So again, looking at these various factors that lead to the creation of for a company, instead of just looking at various isolated things. So tying this again to the whole climate change and reparations movement. So when we look at being as being composed of singular realities and everything being interconnected. So again, the changes that we make now, the changes that a company makes now will be affected throughout generations. So it's not just short-sighted event. So when we move towards renewable sources, when we have better corporate governance and accountability frameworks, it creates these ripple effects that go through generations, because everything is relational and interconnected. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Laureen Mukami. Before we end today's session, and to invite Mr. Mwalimu Humphrey Sipala for the concluding remarks, I would love to invite our panelists to share their final thoughts or key takeaways from the discussions. Perhaps one main message we'd like our audience to leave with. Yes, let's start with Nciko Arnold.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Mine would be, I think we just need to keep on being doers. I think that was really like mentioned throughout this conversation today. Everyone has a responsibility, a duty to act, doing something at your level. I think that's a key one for me. Doers working together, coalition building, But something that has come really, really so strongly from just hearing Professor Chidi speak. It's really my first time hearing you, Professor, and I really need to follow your works so keenly. One major takeaway for me is we also really need to rethink how we tell stories. Yeah, just, the way he did put it, from internally displaced persons to internally disposable persons. It makes something so complex in the very like simplest manner. So, and from there we can see now the relevance of really like narrating, telling stories. How can maybe next time, like rather than having an academic conference, can it be an art competition? Can it be, I don't know, something to do with music? We just need spoken words. We also need to rethink how we tell stories so that our message get to reach to the respective audiences that we are targeting. Yeah, I think I can stop there, and thank you very much for convening this. I hope we can keep on working together, and I hope that we are going to act on some of the ideas, or like the conclusions, or like the call to actions that we did come to in this conference, and that these ideas are not just going to die here, that we'll try to be consistent and try to build on what we have here. Thank you very much once again for inviting me to this important conversation.
Thank you, Nciko. Melissa?
Yeah, so, all this time I have been speaking in singular, yet most of my ideas are borrowed from so many people, in particular my mentor and teacher, Professor Mbani. So I think my parting shot would be to start there. We've spoken about epistemic knowledges and this kind of decolonial fractures that we have to persist and fight. And one of them is just learning from your teachers. Interestingly, Professor Mbani and I not only co-edited that text, Harvesting Equality, and where I should, confess it is the bulk of the work, especially with the farmers, and conceptualizing the entire project. But we also co-teach this class in Ghana. And just this Tuesday, we were discussing Kwame Nkrumah's speech, Motion of Destiny. This is a speech that he made in the House of Commons or the Legislative Assembly in 1953, negotiating for Ghana's independence. Negotiating is the key word here. Indigenizing, when I first saw the conference theme, it reminded me of another teacher of mine, Professor Michelle Remugo, may her soul rest in peace, who had one of her last speeches in Kenya specifically, was titled Indigenizing Sites of Knowledge in Africa. And she still used the word negotiating or asserting. So in that class, we were interested in how Kwame Nkrumah, in 1953, with 1956, 57 still to come in, is in this paradox of a space, this legislative assembly negotiating the freedom of his people, in a structure, in a house that is really the semblance, that is really the artifact. I don't know which word to use. It's the site of oppression. It's the structure of slavery in itself, this legislative assembly, this parliament, this House of Commons. It is so ironical. How does he deal with that? Similarly, climate change, we've always assumed, is a Western idea until we brought it home today. So how are we dealing with this paradox of negotiating this liberation of our minds on climate reparation in a space that's beholden by this structure of oppression that all of our speakers here have narrated, whether it's in corporate spaces, as Mukami has elaborated, or in our, AU, UN spaces, as Nciko has rightly put together. How do we do that? How are we dealing with this paradox? And of course, it connects to the clash of civilizations and the clash of disciplines that I started my speech with. Those would be the places where we have to never forget. And I love that my teachers have always told me or given me the values that I need. And I think I will share some of them. The first one is dignity. This conversation, obviously, we need to dignify the human being. That is something that has come up since morning. Is it one of the values that we just see one another as equals in whatever we do? In this platform even, are we considering ourselves equals or inferiors? I don't know, you know. That dignity question needs to come back. The other thing that needs to come back is discipline. And here, this one, I have to acknowledge Mukami because she's the one who reminded me of Professor Achille Mbembe's speech in Strathmore University, who spoke about discipline. We need to be disciplined. We need to go back to the archive that she spoke, the history of libraries, the Mudimbes and the like. We need to read, and reading means you do it consistently if you're going to be in this fight for epistemic freedoms and so on and so forth. You need to read consistently every day. So today I already have 17 journal articles from Mukami. I need to read another 100 from this conference report because all the authors were very empowered people. And then I have many reports Nciko has written that I need to read. And of course, our very own professor with his multitude of books that I need to read. So I'm already stacking up. And I thank each panelist for that contribution to the epistemic struggle. And the final one, I think really, is to stop being comfortable. Like when we speak about decolonial endeavors or reparations, we need to stop being comfortable because treating things too easily with comfort, so you give up. You know, I held a conference, great. I critiqued in a paper, great. I wrote a book, great. You always have to be itching with what's the next thing I can do? What's the next space? I can go and question and assert my power. That's what Michelle Mugo said. You have to keep asserting your power. Negotiating is not always sitting back. It's always being in the face of people and saying, here I am again with another idea, with another way of doing things. Oh, let me remind you of what I said last time, you know? So like for us, I'll say, Professor Mbani and I, one of the challenges we have is taking that harvesting equality back to the community and saying, thank you. We stole your knowledge, the real knowledge I've learned, not the discarded knowledge. Thank you again, Professor Chidi. I go putting footnotes in my closing remarks. Here is the work. Thank you so much. Did we make sense? And if we didn't, we can ban this text. Or what did we leave out? Can we do a volume 2 or 3 or 4? And this time we don't have to create so many, you know, what do you call it? I can't think of another word other than objectifying the whole process of research. We can just have a conversation there and learn also as researchers who are engaged in this thing. So those kind of leave discomfort to the, you know, to the naysayers, dignify the process of this, and learn from our teachers, learn from the discipline that they've given you to keep going, keep reading and keep fighting. And really, I truly thank you, Nabintu and your team for challenging us today to think about this question again. And also just to thank Kabarak University Press through Mwalimu will speak, another teacher of mine, for, I know this is like his passion project for many years. And, you know, he's brought it back. I was just thinking when he was making his opening remarks in the morning, gosh, if someone has been consistent in faith and environment, it's Mwalimu Sipala. And it's beautiful to see even Laudate Si being discussed so beautifully for me who's Catholic. It's been a personal enrichment, spiritual enrichment for me as well. So thank you so much. And I hope that there'll be more of these. And viva to you guys at FNE.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Let me invite Laureen Nyamu.
Thank you, Nabintu. This has been a really riveting discussion. So for my closing remarks, I think one of the key things that we could take away or key reflections is in our advocacy, in our push for reforms, including these climate reforms and reparations, one of the key things should be to center the love of the African body in our advocacy, so that even as we're pushing the boundaries for the creation of new knowledge, as we're trying to dismantle existing systems, that whatever it is that we are doing, we have that in mind, so that every aspect of our advocacy and even our scholarship is aimed to create good material conditions that the African body can thrive, that communities have livelihoods, that in a few years to come, we'll still have a functioning earth to live by and stop killing the earth. And another thing, as African scholars and as decolonial scholars, one of the things that we should also try to avoid, or the pitfalls that we should try to avoid, is again loving Africa in the abstract. So we need to really keep thinking of how we can translate these ideas into praxis, into real actionable things that will center the African body and make sure that the African body can thrive. So even in our scholarship, let us try and not get lost in the abstraction or even in the voyeurism of all these ideas, and keep pushing the boundaries to how we can really translate them to bring actionable change. So yeah, those two aspects will be my closing remarks.
Thank you. And finally, allow me to invite Prof. Chidi.
Thank you, guys. I don't know whether I have anything more to offer, but I guess you're giving me the privilege of the late comment. So I thank you very much for having me. But this has been a very refreshing conversation, and I hope it's not going to end here. First of all, I find the framing very helpful. Usually when you hear about faith and conversations about faith, it's usually faith is used to denote non-progressive conversations. And so, people are therefore meant to not speak about their faith in civilized settings. And I'm glad that this meeting has been framed within the framework of a more progressive deployment of notions of faith. And I hope that the confidence that is inherent in that framing will continue to radiate through, because, as I said, African societies were societies traditionally of faith. And in a way in which faith made sense to people because it was connected to everyday decisions and our livelihoods. It was colonialism that destroyed our confidence in our faith, such that we were no longer able to talk about our faith with confidence and dignity, which is one of the expression that Melissa underscored. And so that's liberating faith from capture by coloniality and colonialism, and recapturing it back to the center of our existence is essential for an understanding of why this whole climate colonialism has got to change, and why it's got to be changed, and why that body of knowledge around it has got to be liberated. Therefore, whether as narrative in the human, in the humanities and social sciences, or as the normative in law. So that's one thing, that faith is relevant to this conversation, and in a very progressive way. The second thing, keeping with Melissa's D's, discipline and dignity, just a few of those, I think is the one word I've used there, confidence. We've got to return confidence to ourselves. If you've got dignity and discipline, it means you've got to be confident about who you are. And I don't think that we underscore this point about confidence enough, which is why we externalize our sources of authority and our sources of knowledge. Everything has got to be white. And quite honestly, the only thing that colonialism did to us was savagery. And I like to give the example of the return of the body of Patrice Lumumba 3 years ago. What did Belgium return to the DRC as the body of Patrice Lumumba? Teeth, his teeth. And the teeth were extracted at the point of destroying his body. Which civilized species takes a dead body's teeth as a trophy? It was savagery of the worst kind. And, I don't need to tell this to Kenyans because Kenyans experience colonial brutality and in the full majesty of its savagery. Therefore, we need to get a little more confident about our African histories and African ways on a comparative level and begin to recapture that. That confidence comes through in a point I believe that Melissa made, which I need to underscore: the role of the Kabarak University Press. You may see yourselves as this little university in the outposts of the Rift Valley, in Nakuru. But the Kabarak University Press and the Kabarak University, generally speaking, is showing a confidence that for me is very liberating and needs to be acknowledged. And in the way that it's working through the multiple media and platforms of contemporary knowledge manufacture and creation and deployment, it's doing it with immense intelligence. And that's a projection of this confidence. And I'm hoping that the ambition of the university and its press will continue to be sustained, and not just by the current people working in those departments, but through as a tradition of the university in building its personality beyond the current year or a few years. And finally, for me, is the question of individual responsibility for the reconstruction of the African narrative. It's good to talk about Achille Mbembe. I've known Achille for over 25 years, and Achille has made a mission of that. Before Achille, of course, it was Valentin Mudimbe and his generation. And now, of course, Professor Mudimbe is not going to live forever. He's already in his late 80s, and so replacement is necessary. Achille is not going to live forever, although he's a lot younger. But we need a replacement generation, and that replacement generation is going to have to confront its own challenges in a new age of, artificial intelligence and digital economies and all of that. But that replacement generation already needs to start taking responsibility right now. That business of calling younger people the leaders of tomorrow is done. Everybody is a leader now. If you are over 18 or over 21, you're a leader today. Don't allow anybody to tell you your time will come. If your time does not come now, it will not come ever. And so we've got to encourage one another to take that space, to make it work, and to work with one another across generations in an intergenerational partnership to make sure that the younger people today find their voice. And so I find voices like Ms. Nyamu here very exciting to listen to, and the way that she's framed this issue. And I hope we can all support one another, particularly younger generations, to find confidence in their voices and not let go of that confidence once it is found. Thank you very much for having me again.
Wow, thank you so much to all our panelists for those insightful closing thoughts. Thank you so much to Prof. Chidi. I know you are not a morning person, and I know it's early morning right now in Boston. Thank you, Melissa, who joined us since 9 a.m. Kenyan time. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nciko, for supporting your sister, actually. Thank you for showing up. Thank you so much, Mukami, for joining us. You are here also since 9 a.m. and we're still here. So before inviting Professor Mwalimu, Mr. Sipara, I would like to just take a brief personal moment to thank you all. And more specifically, because after Mr. Sipala is the incoming Faith and Environment Coordinator. Joy Kagunda, who will be just speaking at the end. I just wanted to take a brief personal moment to thank you all for these 2 years of support, 2 years of exchange, 2 years of being part in this project, creating intellectual and moral spaces to just see how can faith and environment uh, address this question of environmental injustice that we are facing today. I've learned I've learned a lot in this space, and for sure I'll continue being there and supporting, of course, Joy Kakunda, who will just be speaking. And also thank you so much to Mwali Musipala, who actually entrusted me with his baby. Actually, this is Mwali Musipala baby's like project. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Melissa, who has been around for so long and also who is here again supporting us. Thank you again to the provost of Kabarak University, who also has been a very, very great supporter. And also thank you to Professor John Osoko Ambani, who is actually our host today. Thank you to Nciko, who, yes, family things, we even show me the way to do some things. And I'm so happy to have you here. Yes, so grateful. And also thank you so much to my team for putting all this together. I'm so, so grateful. And yeah, right now, let me just invite now Mwali Musipala. Karibu-san. Thank you. Okay, since Mr. Sipala is not in, allow me to invite Joy Kagunda. Then we'll continue with Mr. Sipala. My apologies. My apologies, Mr. Sipala is in. If you could just start, then Joy will continue.
I hope I can be seen and heard. Oh, thank you so much. As it so happens with these gadgets, they decide to hang at that one moment when you've been waiting. It's with a very full, grateful heart that I make a few closing remarks. Since 9:30 this morning, Kenyan time, 2 a.m. Chicago for Professor Ibrahim Odzamir, I think 11 p.m. for Dr. Ayla in Adelaide, Australia, and Professor Chidi also at an early morning, I think from Medford. We have been reflecting, and every other person in between. I'll speak of the boundary so that we can think of everyone in between. We have been reflecting on faith and environment in the context of edifying indigenous knowledge in the face of one of what the three planetary crises, as UNEP calls them, climate change, and the question of climate justice. Allow me to start with something Professor Chidi mentioned. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Chidi, at this early hour for you. The thinking behind faith and environment is precisely as Professor Chidi has been mentioning, which is a triumphant reclaiming of our epistemic history, of our intellectual heritage as African peoples, but as global South peoples as well. The Faith and Environment Project has been, from its onset, committed to two limbs, two broad ideas. One is to be decolonial and Afrocentric. The other is to be ecumenical and hermeneutical, in the ecumenism, in the theologizing. It is Joseph Ratzinger, I think he was a theologian before he became Pope Benedict XVI. In one piece, I remember him talking about how you don't study theology, you do theology. I am inspired today by the thinking of two Africans. One is Jonas Mbiti, who I mentioned in the morning, famously in 1969, talked of how Africans are notoriously religious. I found a lot of explanation of what that could mean in two works of the great Tanzanian theologian of happy memory as well, Laureen Magesa. He has a 1997 book called African Religions, The Moral Traditions of an Abundant Life. The second book, which is from around 2010, is called What is Not Sacred. And in this duality of a thought process for this theologian, he discusses those aspects of African tradition that imbue themselves into everything that we do in life. In What is Not Sacred, he particularly confronts the idea that this bifurcation of society into secular and religious and faith, the faith and the profane, as it were, and insists that our intellectual heritage, our traditions had no such division, which is what Professor Chidi was speaking to, about our societies having been, and still in many ways being fundamentally theocratic. Reverend Professor Magesa says in What is Not Sacred, he says that the African worldview, in the African worldview, spirituality is an activity. It's not a passive quality. It's not something that's there, to be observed, to be admired from far. But it's imbues itself into everything that we do. It is in the way we cross rivers. It's in the way we plant trees, or it's the way we slaughter animals. He says it's a way of behaving. It's a way of relating. This function of relationship has been spoken to by many of the panelists throughout the day. Since 2022 at Kabarak University Press, we've been having a series of conversations. We have started a blog, as Nabintu has mentioned. We have a series of webinars, many of which are online, where we have been contemplating the question of faith and environment in this dual value system, decolonial and Afrocentric on the one hand, and ecumenical and hermeneutical. We are a society of many faiths. Professor Ozumid was speaking about that as well. This need to rediscover the strengths in our faiths and reject the siloing of ideas, the siloing and the fundamentally chauvinistic idea of saying your faith is better than mine. What we lost, as Professor Chidi was saying, in the colonial tragedy was that ecumenical culture to faith. We hope this has been one more of these conversations. I myself have learned quite a bit from every panel from the morning. My excitement is that this is a student-organized conference, student-led. In many times in the last 3 months, I have felt like Nabintu and her team have sometimes looked at me like I'm the one who's slowing them down. I feel quite privileged to be sharing this intellectual journey with the great team that runs the Faith and Environment Project. We will continue to be, as a Global South academic publisher, proactively establishing platforms to speak about the scholarly discourses that are relevant to our peoples. We cannot be comfortable to sit and wait for scholarship to come. We must instigate the conversations that liberate our minds, that motivate our souls, and encourage ourselves to grasp this future of prosperity intellectually, socially, spiritually. We will very much look forward to putting out the proceedings of this conference. Certainly, these recordings will be up on our YouTube channels in a couple of days. I thank all of you who have joined us, every panel from the very beginning. I see Lucy Pluma is still with us till now. Most thankful for all who woke up early, those who slept late yesterday in organizing, and a few other days before. And I thank you all. And I look forward to many more of this. Thank you so much. It's a blessing.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joy Kabunda. I'm the incoming Faith and Environment Project Coordinator. First off, I want to thank everyone who has really put down a lot of work in ensuring that this day is a success, this project is a success, starting from the Shadrach Olumeyak, who is the Vice Coordinator, and Yvonne, who is also the Secretary to the FNE, Nabintu, who has been an amazing mentor to us also, and Kule Hussein. Want to also give a vote of thanks to Shadrach, the first panel, that is Shadrach Olumiak. That was amazing. Thank you very much for making time to be part of that panel. Kule Hussein, thank you very much. Owen Dirango, that was amazing. An amazing talks here around you. Panel 2, Dr. Teresia Muthoni, thank you very much. She is also a lecturer at Kabarak University. Thank you for making time to be part of this conference in between your very busy schedule. In absentia also Reverend Justus Mutuku, who is the acting provost. Thank you very much for making time to have these important conversations with us. Dr. Alusala, thank you so much. Dorcas, thank you so much. Who is a representative at Bahamis Kumaris in Nairobi. Thank you very much. Miss Lucy Palmer was also part of the panel 2, SGI representative, NEP Faith for Faith Interfaith for Women Council member. Thank you very much for making time to have these conversations today. Professor Ibrahim, thank you very much for making time to also be here. He woke up very early at 2 a.m. to ensure he follows up right from Chicago. Thank you very much, sir. We feel very much honored. Dr. Albert Barume, UN Special Rapporteur on Indigenous People, thank you very much for being part of this amazing project. And Dr. Leslie Johnson, who was not able to be with us, but she sent a video. Very much thankful because of that video, for making time to send us that video that will also spearhead in having these diverse conversations that we're having today. Again, Dr. Ayla Vale, who has been with us through all the sessions. Thank you very much, Doctor. Panel 4, so Nciko Arnold, thank you so much. Miss Melissa, Mungai, thank you very much. Our tutorial fellow here at Kabarak Law School. Madam also Laureen, Mukami, Nyamu, who is also the former chief editorial Kabarak University Press. Thank you very, very much. And of course, Professor Chidi Odinkalu, thank you very much. Though you came late, we are really thankful that you had time to spend with us. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I take this opportunity to extend our heartfelt gratitude to all who have made today's event a success. That is also to Professor John Osogo Ambani, who is the Dean Kabarak Law School, also Mr. Humphrey Sipala, who has really carried this project at heart, who is the editor-chief, KABUPress, also to the moderators, that is Shadrach, Nabintu, and also Carson. Thank you very much. And Pereso, thank you very much for your time. And also a very big thank you for the organizing team for the dedication and hard work behind the scenes, ensuring that everything moves flawless. In that regard, I would want to ask Elvis Mogesa to do the closing prayer.
Thank you so much, Joy and Letitia. So my only work is to pray, but I'll also remind us that tomorrow we continue with the conference on the law reviews, and we hope to see you all then. Thank you. So, loving Creator of the universe, as we draw this gathering to a close, we thank you for the wisdom shared and the hearts united in purpose. In the vast expanse of space, we remember our call to stewardship, caring not only for the earth, but for the heavens above. Guide us as we navigate the complexities of law and justice, seeking cooperation across nations and cultures. May the dialogue we've begun today and grow into meaningful action, driven by your spirit of peace and unity. We entrust our shared journey to you. Amen. Thank you.